A big Shabbat Shalom to everyone here today and to all those that are watching and catching up via the YouTube or the Rumble channel. We want to wish you all a big Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to the river. We pray that you are blessed, that you will be blessed. And it's good to be back. We're going to continue today through this wonderful book of First Timothy. We've covered a lot of ground just in the first 3 chapters, and I hope that people are beginning to appreciate the importance and value of this book to us, not only as individual people within the house of Israel, but more importantly, a body of the house of Israel. The Western culture is a very individualistic and very fragmented, and this fragmentation, and it continues to just grow and grow as the world spirals into chaos and society essentially continues to go down the plug hole. But we are promised in his word that in the midst of all the chaos and the madness and darkness, that a people would come forth and actually shine a light in these very dark times. And so this is part of the reason why we're going through this book of First Timothy, not only to kind of answer the question of why do we do things the way we do as a community, but hopefully start to understand the deeper why, especially as it applies to a bigger plan of redemption perspective, that there will be a people called the house of Israel that begins to give a witness, that begins to, by its very existence, actually cause offense to a world that is plunged into chaos and darkness. And while we do not mean to cause offense, when a light shines, we know that the darkness scatters. And usually when the darkness scatters, it does so very violently. And so want to know more why sometimes we face such hostility. But, you know, when we come into this faith, we come in with this very individualistic mindset. And yes, there is a place that we need to get our own houses in order first before we can even begin to start looking at body dynamics. But as a wider community, I can see the evidence that people are learning what it means to have accountability on the individual level. And what we're starting to see is a community come together and to shine a light by its very existence and by its very modus operandi. We act very differently to vast proportions of the body. And so the reason for that is because we take these words that the Apostle Paul gave to Timothy very seriously. And while it's not us putting Paul on the pedestal, because Paul is not the author of our faith, Yeshua is. However, Yeshua did choose the Apostle Paul to lay the groundwork as to how a body is to operate and behave. And so in the last, we've covered a lot of grounds. In the last few parts, the last couple of parts especially, have been very much focused around those that would wish to serve within his house. And so today is going to be kind of no different. I've titled it A Faithful Servant. What does it mean to be a faithful servant? Because ultimately we all want to hear these words, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been trustworthy with the little. Let me entrust you with much. Come and enter into the joy of your master. And so it's, this series is critical, fundamental, elemental in the sense that, or elementary in that it should be the foundation of everybody's faith journey. But before we dive into today's teaching, let's quickly recap what we covered in part 3. Part 3 was an extremely convicting message because it's one of the messages that you go through and it shines a light into our life, and by virtue of that, it shows us where we fall short. And so, again, convicting part. Part 3, the chapter 3 opens up right off the heels of chapter 2. And in chapter 2, we looked at the fall of man and why it's critical for us to have a biblical understanding of the fall of man, not the understanding that is generally taught out there, which was given to us by Rome. And so the point that I make here is that it's not by happenstance or chance that the Apostle Paul goes right from the fall of man into the qualifications of servant leadership, because a servant leader within the body will need a biblical understanding of the fall of man if he or she is to serve, because invariably what happens when you serve, you come up against the same spiritual dynamics over and over again. They just manifest themselves very differently sometimes. And so, but when you peel back the layers, you will usually find, spiritual adultery, usurping, the abuse of headship and the design of men and women, usually more often than not is always at the root of noise that a servant leader will face. And so want to know more why Paul he precedes the qualifications of servant leadership with a biblical understanding of what actually occurred at the garden. Because again, to anybody that will serve, you need to understand this. If you cannot peel back the layers and ultimately come to a root of usurping, abusive design, these types of things, maybe you need to polish up on your line of sight. And that's just to put it mildly. Paul says that those that seek to serve, they actually seek a noble task. Now, this word noble in the Greek it's a lot more nuanced than something that is high, lofty. It had this idea of something where you would have to count the cost. It's not something that you do willy-nilly. You will pay a price to serve. And those that serve know what I'm saying. However, despite the cost that a servant leader will have to pay in seeking this noble task, something will come out of it. And this is something that is precious and tested. You will be tested by fire. Your character will be refined. And so the question is, who is it precious to? Because my understanding of scripture is that someone is seeking a bride. Our King is seeking a bride, something that is precious. However, if she is to sit on the throne of judgment beside him, she will have to have been tested. And nothing that is good and precious comes without cost, fire, and crushing. The overseer, the servant leadership, in the Greek it says episkope, and the meaning of episkope essentially is someone that is able to discern a situation and therefore able to mete out the appropriate action. And so this is why, to use a shadow picture, parents will treat a toddler very differently to a teenager because they're able to discern a situation and maturity levels, and they will mete out the appropriate action as a result of that. And so in the same way, servant leaders in the body, you need a sense of discernment and to be able to mete out appropriate action and decisions. The root of episkope is the Greek word skopos, which is a dual meaning word. It can be a watchman, but it can also be the goal that a watchman watches for. And so I've got this phrase here from the Apostle Paul, imitate me as I imitate Messiah. An episkope, not only is he a watchman watching for the goal, which is Messiah, but the watchman needs to be almost a shadow picture of Messiah himself. Like, this is why Paul would say, imitate me as I imitate Messiah. The watchman is having people look to him, but the watchman needs to be pointing people to the goal, which is Messiah. And so even within the word episkope, you see the process of discipleship. You've had to learn from someone that's gone before you. This is why we use the term the donkey ahead of the road, or someone that's gone before you in something. You need to learn from them, but they need to be pointing you to Messiah. okay? An overseer has to have forgotten the traditions and dogma of men in Mystery Babylon. They have to, because if not, what are you pointing them towards to? Are you pointing them to Messiah, or are you pointing them to the harlot? And so this is why it's critical that servant leadership has got rid of the leaven in their lives. And whilst it's not enough to forget these things, you have to be straining forward to the higher calling of the noble task, which comes at a cost. And this idea of straining forward, this pressing on, the Greek word is dioko, which is essentially through persecution and trial. Think narrow and hard pressed is the way to life, and few find it, okay? Again, no good thing biblically comes without cost, fire, crushing, pressing, but from that will be what comes, what is precious and tested. And so, yes, we have to forget the lies that we've inherited from our fathers, but we need to replace these things with what is lovely, what is pure, what is noble, what is worthy of praise. Focus on these things, as the Apostle Paul would say. An overseer and a deacon has to be the husband of one wife. And I've put here the line, understanding the fall of man. Yes, on a superficial level, monogamy is out of the picture. But there's a deeper understanding of this, especially when it comes to usurping. In the garden, what was Eve doing? Rather than listening to the voice of her husband, she was listening to the voice of the serpent. And so she's looking to someone who is not her head for understanding and headship. And so you get this form of spiritual adultery because Eve was listening and taking on from something or someone else. And in the same way, the majority of usurping that I see in the body is of servant leaders usurping other marriages. In the Christian faith, it tends to manifest itself in, the pastor is the guy put on the pedestal. But in Judaism, it's the rabbi that's put on the pedestal. And you'll have, wives going to the rabbi or to the pastor rather than their husbands. And so husbands, your duty as a husband and as an overseer of your family unit is you need to be discerning the teacher, the pastor, the rabbi, whatever you want to call it. It's on you what your wife and your children listen to. And so we have to understand, while there is a role for teachers and servant leadership in the body, it's not to come at the expense of usurping marriages. And so this husband of one wife is actually far more nuanced and deeper than simply a discussion on monogamy or the lack thereof. You can claim, I've only got one wife, but who's your wife putting her headship in? Who's your wife going to? Who are your children going to? Servant leaders must not be led by their emotions. So this idea of being sober-minded, again, it can mean sober in the sense of not under the influence, but the Greek is pointing to someone that is able to take every thought captive. Emotions do not dictate truth. Emotions are just a barometer of what's going on in your heart, soul, and mind, but they do not dictate the truth of a situation. And so a servant leader, again, this is one of the key aspects of discernment. Can you put your emotions aside and see things for what they truly are? This isn't what it means to be sober-minded. Let's say you're going through a trial. Are you able to make sound discussion, sound reasonings and decisions, despite the fact that you're experiencing emotional turmoil? And if not, this then highlights the reason for accountability and discipleship, because, all of us are human, all of us have emotions, and all of us can fall foul of those emotions at times, yours truly included. And so this highlights the reason why you need people in your life that have gone before you so that you can run things past them and say, hey, brother, I don't think I can make a sober-minded discussion right now. My emotions are running rife. Can you help me? What do you see? The ability to guard one mind and heart. And so again, this thing of being sober-minded, and if you're struggling to do that, this highlights the need for accountability in one's life. You know, there's been times as well when I have been in a sober-minded state. I'm not being ruled by my emotions, and I still need accountability because I don't know everything. I do not see all things. I do not know all things. And my brother next to me might be able to go, hey, Michael, you haven't seen this, brother. Servant leaders must be above normal and exemplary. So this idea of the English word used was dignity. So this is where you may hear me say a comment that other believers is not the yardstick that you should be judging yourself by. Just because you're doing a lot better than the other believers does not mean you're actually even hitting the goal. Messiah is our goal. And so servant leaders actually need to be an example, which goes back to the meaning of episcope, you know, that you are a watchman and someone that people watch to so that you can point them to Messiah. Servant leaders can't be under the influence, whether they be alcohol, drugs, psychotropic drugs. I mean, it wouldn't bode very well if my coffee cup was constantly filled with wine or liquor, would it now? And so, but I joke, but it's, again, while the scriptures use the term wine and alcohol, it's pointing to a deeper truth that you need to be of sound mind. Why? So that you have the ability to hear and discern the voice of the Ruach. And this is, unfortunately, one of the side effects of being under the influence, whether it be alcohol, drugs, psychotropic drugs, anything that alters your God-given state of mind. Because, look, to use a very simple analogy, who here made wise decisions when under the influence of a substance? Usually they're not that wise, and they can be very reckless. And so using that as an example, what about when you're emotionally unstable? Who here has made wise decisions when emotionally unstable? You know, you can be under the influence of your emotions or of your grief or even your trauma. It's not you that's thinking. It's the substance, it's the trauma, it's the abuse. Whatever it is, you're not sober-minded. And when you're not sober-minded, you lack the ability to hear and discern the voice of the Ruach. And to use a very well-known example as well, denominations that tend to be led by their emotions, they will attribute that to the Spirit. And they'll say, oh, I feel the Spirit. And it's like, well, actually, no, you're feeling your emotions. And are you truly discerning the voice of the Ruach? Or are you subjectively listening to the voice in your head and attributing that to the Ruach? Again, this is why accountability is critical. Not violent. And while that obviously means not punching people and slapping them with Torah scrolls, it's got a deeper meaning of not being antagonistic, contentious, or pugnacious. You know, not only does it mean that you are quarrelsome, but the behavior that you would display that would then lure people into being contentious themselves so that then you can shift the blame on them, when in fact you're the one that orchestrated it all. That's actually very malicious. We're not to be like that. We're to be gentle. However, gentle does not mean, you know, pink fairy dust, puppies and rainbows, and they're there. It's actually to be able to give out appropriate accountability in proportion to someone's maturity. which is why you read statements like, those who are strong in the faith need to bear the failings of those who are weak or less mature in the faith. Again, parents will deal with toddlers very differently than they will with teenagers. Why? Because they have the ability to take into account someone's maturity and dish out the appropriate measure, hence why you need the discernment to be able to even do such a thing. Managing one's house, servant leaders, deacons, you need to be able to manage your own house. And to manage or head your house is to have authority over it, but it also means to guard it and to nurture it. And unfortunately, men particularly, painting a broad brushstroke here, they tend to struggle with the nurturing aspect of being the head of the house, especially at the emotional level, as men, again, broadly speaking, can be quite emotionally constipated. And so within the term of guardianship and authority and nurturing, the ability to get one's house to be able to stand by itself. When you raise your children, you want them to be able to be a functioning adult in life. Will your house over time be able to stand by itself? Because ultimately your children, your wife, they're not accountable. They will not face you in judgment. They will face Messiah. And so will the house stand judgment? Now, I'm talking within the family level here, but this also applies to the greater house, i.e. the house of Israel. Servant leaders, are you managing his house to the level where it will be able to stand judgment? Because your ability to serve into people may actually affect people's judgment day. It's a sobering thought. Not only do you need to manage your house, you need to do so with dignity. Again, what is above ordinary, what is exemplary, therefore it's worthy of praise. Managing one's house is indicative of how one will manage the house of Elohim. And so again, we all want to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful with the little. And right now, this is the little. The much that is to come is the ruling of the nations. It's a bridal governance. And so this is why it behooves us now to learn the lessons of what it means to be wise managers of a household. Servant leadership needs to be above reproach, as it will be attacked and slandered by adversaries, not only that will come from outside, but especially from those that will come within. And this is why servant leadership needs to be above reproach, because I've put here, the job is hard enough. Don't be arming a slanderer. Unfortunately, we see this a lot within the body that, people will go, well, this leader did this and this leader did that. And usually they're right. Like they're stating truth. And what it does, it breeds so much division and distrust. And people can ultimately lose their faith, because if a servant leader does not act in a way that is above reproach. Servant leaders cannot be newly planted, as the Greek says, because they've not developed deep roots. Think of the parable of the sower here. Playing the long game to see one tested by adversity and time. And this is what we as a Western society really struggle with, because we have this culture of instant gratification. I want to be Torah observant yesterday, as if being totally Torah observant is even possible, because only Messiah was truly Torah observant. We can pursue Torah, we can want to grow in it, but again, we struggle with playing the long game. And especially because we struggle watching people going through fire, and then we want to go in and rescue them. And it's like, no, let's see what they're truly made of. Let's see their character. Deacons are to have the same prerequisites as overseers. They must hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience, i.e. without hypocrisy. And the only way this will be revealed is by testing, i.e. playing the long game. Playing the long game. And we'll get into this a bit more today. Now, what separates an overseer and a deacon is essentially decision-making authority. But we're going to see today that essentially a deacon is someone that has authority above him. And we're going to see today that actually we know that Timothy was an overseer of where he was at, but we also see him as a deacon because he's answering to Paul. And so essentially a deacon is someone that has authority over him and that enacts the orders of the authority above him. But we're going to see today that Timothy was actually both an overseer and a deacon. But we'll get to that. Those who serve have a chance of getting a good standing of the judgment of Messiah. They get great boldness in the faith because, again, you pay a price to serve. Those who serve will have boldness. And in Greek, the boldness means to have the ability to say and do what is truly needed. You do not fear men. And I believe this then ties to having boldness to come before the throne. This ability to say, Father, I have done what you have asked. I have done it to the best of my ability. It's now to you to oversee. This is why you would have boldness to come before the throne for mercy, as John would say. Is the portion of the body that we are responsible for a pillar and a buttress of the truth? Ultimately, that's the litmus test of the a servant leader's serving into a community. Does it start to become a witness, not only to the Romans, but to the other believers? And I believe we're beginning to see this in our community. And finally, this mystery of godliness that is revealed in the flesh. And rather than making this a Godhead debate, we looked at this thing of, is Messiah shining forth from us? Truly shining forth from us? Because it's that enables us to be a pillar and a buttress of the truth. So, on to today. 1 Timothy chapter 4. Now, the Spirit expressly says that in later times, some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons. Before we even get to the deceitful spirits and teachings of demons, what is the faith that was handed down once and for all? As we've seen, especially from parts 1, that the faith is rooted and grounded in discipleship. If you want to spot a lack of true faith, see if there's discipleship or not within it. And I'm not talking about, does it claim to have discipleship? Because there's many denominations that claim discipleship, but yet I find it wanting. Because true discipleship will bring about repentance, it will bring about heart circumcision, it will bring about tangible evidence in someone's life that you cannot manufacture when you play the long game. Again, critical, playing the long game of testing and tribulation, of truly testing someone's character. And so we have to understand what deceitful spirits and teachings of demons are. You have to understand what it means to the faith. It's a biblical faith founded in discipleship that is founded upon the front of the book and the back of the book, the blood of Messiah and the Torah, with discipleship at the core. So understand that this is the faith. And whatever these deceitful spirits and teachings of demons are, it will lead you away from the faith. Okay, so it will lead you away from the Torah, it will lead you away from the blood of Messiah, but it will also lead you away from discipleship and accountability. And this is the bit that is missing everywhere. You can point at Christianity and go, oh, they threw out the Torah. And you can point to Judaism and go, oh, well, they've thrown out the New Testament. But now start looking at who's throwing out discipleship and accountability. All of a sudden, the scope just went huge, right? And this is a critical part that people miss. Critical. Let's remember that in Daniel, the prophet Daniel says, I think in chapter 7, that the adversarial position will attack, or it will think to change the law and the appointed times. The law, because the Torah, it's the foundation of our faith. It gives us the character of Yah. But the appointed times, because who does it point to? It points to Messiah. And so what you will see, a characteristic of attacking the Torah and the appointed times, is that you will have a faulty understanding, especially in regards to prophecy. But if you attack the covenant, the Torah, you do not know how to behave, because a lot of behavior, inverted commas, is founded in the Torah. Loving Yah and loving your neighbor is found in the Torah, and it's expounded upon in the New Testament. It's not a new thing in the New Testament. It's simply a deeper insight into what was already written. But discipleship and accountability, again, you will find that in the Torah. You have leaders of tens, leaders of 50s, leaders of hundreds and thousands. You see the 70 elders. You see the Council of Jerusalem. This is all discipleship based. Timothy, Paul, like father, son in the discipleship terms. And Paul making himself accountable to Peter, James, or Yaakov, and John and Yochanan. Discipleship, the appointed times, and the Torah. This is the true faith. Anything that will try to chip away at any one of these three things will take you away from the faith. How do they do this? Through the insincerity of liars whose consciences are seared. Okay, so remember chapter 1, that there will be many people that will seek to divide people over arguments of the Torah, and as a result, they become hypocrites because they say one thing but do another. They claim the faith, yet the fruit is absent in their life. Okay, so again, this is not a matter of, having the Torah or not. It's a lot deeper than that. What does it mean to have an insincere faith? And these people, their consciences are seared, i.e., you cannot reason with them, who forbid marriage and require abstinence from foods that Elohim created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. Now, the forbidding marriage and the requiring abstinence is not the root issue. These are symptoms of a root issue. The root issue is what I've put here. The focus of these false teachers is on the outside of the cup, or think the flesh, the external appearances. As we covered in part 1, they may claim Torah on their lips. They worship him with their words, but they keep their hearts far from him. They have an appearance of godliness, whether that be in the Christian sense, in the Judeo sense. When you focus on the outside of the cup, you start to see strange behaviors like forbidding marriage. Like, this is a fleshly thing here. Requiring abstinence from foods. Oh, I don't touch these foods, therefore I'm set apart. And it's like, no, that's got nothing to do with your character or your heart condition. That's just something you can do on the outward appearance. The root is focusing on the outside of the cup. It just so happens that in Paul's day, one of the ways that this manifested was these things in verse 3. But this manifests in so many different ways. Let's use a really easy example. Stop cussing, right? You'll see people that they pride themselves in not cussing, and I'm not approving here of cussing, but yet in the same breath, they will slander their brother. Which do you think is more damaging? Saying some quote unquote bad words, which is distasteful and can be a bad witness, or cutting your brother down, murdering him with your lips? Or let's use an example. The SDAs, look, I come from the SDAs originally. They pride themselves, by and large, vegetarianism, abstinence of alcohol. Yet, so they're not ingesting certain foods. Meanwhile, they're ingesting leaven and the doctrines that come from Rome, ironically. Which do you think is more damaging? You can focus so much on the flesh that you completely miss the weightier matter. And this is what the doctrines of demons and deceitful spirits will do. They will say, focus on the outside of the cup, however that will manifest. Let's look at the art of seduction here. Let's go back to the garden. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that Yah Elohim had made. He said to the woman, did Elohim actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? What is the enemy focusing on? Something outwardly. The eating of something. Now, there is a deeper connotation, but look at what he's focusing at. The woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but Elohim said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And so we covered this. Eve is adding to the command. This is the first instance of the traditions of women, men, right? Think in the spiritual shadow picture, in the weightier matter, we are the woman. We're the ones that take away from the word of Elohim and add our own doctrines and teachings to it. But look at what Eve has brought about. A fleshly component. A fleshly component. The serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. For Elohim knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. You will be like Elohim, knowing good and evil. And so notice here in verse 5, the enemy didn't lie. Because we know that when Adam and Eve ate of the fruit, their eyes were opened. They were like Elohim, knowing good and evil, because Elohim said so himself. But what he did, he bent the truth in verse 4. You will not die. Okay? Now we know that for partaking of the fruit, they did die. But do you think that the woman and Adam would have died if they'd touched of the fruit? It doesn't say that. And again, I believe the enemy is using Eve's addition, note the fleshly addition to the command, to be able to weave the lie of verse 4. What is he saying? You will not surely die in conjunction to. Do you see? And so the enemy is bending the truth. And notice he's not outright lying. He is bending truth. And so you will quite often see that, look, in a lot of denominations out there, there is a lot of truth, but they use it in a way to bend other portions of scripture. That is demonic. It is deceitful that you will use truth to lie, if that makes sense. This is where the deception and the seduction into spiritual adultery occurs. And this is, it's wicked, absolutely wicked. 2 Corinthians 11 says, I am afraid, as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Messiah. Now, the manuscript evidence is actually split down the middle regarding this verse, because the other reading is probably what you're more familiar with, that by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from the simplicity that is in Messiah. The faith is simple. It's just very deep. But if it's that simple, you should be able to explain it to a child. But as you grow, you develop, and you mature, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And so I've put here that essentially, the traditions of men and Mystery Babylon will lead us away from the simplicity of the faith. Have you ever noticed that when you see people trying to justify their denominational position, they always do this hop, skip, and wobble, and like the amount of scriptural and mental gymnastics you have to do to hold on to your doctrine? You start to see these traditions and dogmas of men, actually, they're not simple anymore. You know, it's really easy to see in the prophecy teachings. You see these great big charts and timelines and parentheses here and remember this and blah, 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 blah. And actually, no. The prophecy is simple when you have a biblical wedding covenant appointed times lens. It's actually simple, very deep, yes, and nuanced and detailed, yes, but simple at its root. These traditions that lead us away from the simplicity in Messiah is actually what takes us away from a sincere and pure devotion to Messiah. What this verse here in this rendering, it's actually pointing to hypocrisy. If you're insincere, you're a hypocrite. Pure and simple. And your devotion is not pure. It's mixed, right? What does Yah say? Do not add, do not take away. Yah is in the business of separating light and darkness, wicked and good. There's a clear delineation between the things of Yah and the things of the world. And he says, you do not mix these things. The minute you start mixing these things, your devotion is not pure because you're serving self. And it's insincere because you're a hypocrite, because you claim to follow Elohim, but really you've got two masters. You claim to have Elohim, but actually your master is man and ultimately the harlot. And Yeshua says you cannot have two masters. You will love one and hate the other, which is why John says, do not love that which is of the world, that which is of man or the adversary, because the love of the Father is not in him. And so this is why it's critical that we're not to mix the traditions of men, so to speak, the spiritual seduction, is these fleshly things into the faith. Colossians 2:18, let no one disqualify you. Disqualify you from what? I mean, this is a really big question to ask. What can you be disqualified from? We know that there's going to be rewards given at said judgment, that there is an inheritance to those who overcome, not to those who believe, to those who overcome. Do you mean that by focusing on the flesh and emotions and bringing in these dogmas, we can actually be disqualified from our inheritance? You better believe it. Let no one disqualify you insisting on asceticism and worship of angels. So asceticism is essentially the do not touch, do not taste. You know, I'll use a pagan example, but you get these like monks, especially in Buddhism, that they wear plain clothing and they eat plain food and they do all this stuff in the flesh. This is what it's speaking of here, asceticism. Making yourself so-called holier by letting go of fleshly things, but yet avoiding the things that they're pointing to, which is the letting go of the things of this world on a heart level, i.e. the love of the world, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life, okay? Because you can give up all these things in the flesh and it mean absolutely nothing for character refinement. The worship of angels, i.e., the worship of authorities that are not Elohim, okay? Going on in detail about visions puffed up without reason by his sensuous mind, i.e., the things of the flesh, and not holding fast to the head. So they're not holding fast to Messiah. What are they holding fast to? They've replaced Messiah with something else, i.e. something fleshly, whether it be the teachings of men or whether it be just outright demonic. from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with the growth that is from Elohim. So notice what they do. They insist on asceticism, or they focus on the outside of the cup. You best clean the outside of that cup. Stop eating this, stop drinking that, stop wearing this, stop saying that. And instead of pointing to Messiah, they point to someone or something else, whether it be a denomination or a pastor, a rabbi, or in Paul's day, angels even. Look what they're doing. They're using the supernatural as authority. I had a dream. I had a vision. I went to heaven. I came back with a message for you. By the way, I'm not picking on Christianity here, because Judaism has got its own version of this. You know, rabbis that so-called ascended to heaven and saw the Messiah that is not Yeshua. I mean, sorry, I'm not going there. But what they will do, they will use their so-called supernatural experiences as a form of authority as to why you should listen to them. And then what they will do, they will validate said authority by their own feelings and emotions. So look, they go on in details about visions, but really they're puffed up without reason by their sensuous mind. This is why, look, I'll pick on Christianity, then I'll pick on Judaism. Let's throw everyone under the bus today. In Christianity, what you tend to see is, I had a vision of heaven and hell. And then what they'll do is like, oh, and I can feel the spirit. And if you've been trained to gauge spiritual truth by your emotions, they will prey on your emotions. And if you say, oh, I'm feeling emotionally moved, it must be the spirit, they must be right, on you go to buy their book for $59.99. And boom, hook, line, sinker. On the Judeo side, you see this where certain rabbis have so-called ascended to some kind of heaven, or they had a vision of the Messiah. And what they'll do then, they'll use their rabbinical authority to say, this is why you need to listen to me. And so they shift the focus to them and their understanding. Do you see how this plays out? In Paul's day, you've got to think that Gnosticism was starting to come into the body of Messiah, this Grecian Roman influence and way of thinking. But at the root, it's all the same. Focus on the outside of the cup, use the so-called supernatural to give yourself some kind of authority, and then prey on people's emotions and lack of discernment to be able to validate your authority over them. Is this starting to ring true? If with Messiah you died to the elemental things of the world. Now, elemental, this word in the Greek can mean foundational, but it can also, like as in primary education, it needs to be foundational, but it can also mean the elements of what makes up the earth, or the elements that make up the creation, i.e., the physical things, right? So what Paul is saying is, if with Messiah you died to this world, right? We're in the world, but we're not of it, right? If you have, like, whoever has the love of the things of this world, of this creation. So, or Yeshua says, do not store up treasures on earth, but rather store up treasures in heaven, because where your treasures are, there your heart is also. And where your heart is, that's whom you love. And so this is all Paul is saying. If you've died to these things, i.e., the things of the flesh, the foods, the asceticism, this is not what makes you set apart. It's your heart and your overcoming. This is what gets you to be set apart, right? So if you've died to these worldly creation-based things, why, as though you were still alive in the world, because we're in the world, but we're not to be of it, why then do you submit yourself to regulations? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. Right? This goes back to this asceticism here. Like, you're giving up these fleshly things. This is not speaking of the food laws, as Christianity will teach you. This is speaking of using fleshly things to make yourself so-called holier than thou. Referring to things that all perish when they are used. Paul's like, he's elucidating here. Like, it's going to perish. Your clothes are going to perish. According to human precepts and teachings. This is the traditions of men. These things that man, it takes away from the word of Elohim and it adds these things. And these things focus on the outside of the cup. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body. This is why, the worldly non-believers, they look at these monks in, like, say, Buddhism or wherever, and they go, wow, right? But it's all self-made religion. They are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. Other translations, no value, but it's only for the flesh. These things actually only for the flesh. Essentially, what Paul is saying is these teachings and precepts of demons, they have an appearance of godliness. They look good, but they deny its power, right? There's no overcoming in heart circumcision and still the same bad fruit. All it does is feed self and pride. Why is it that these so-called monks out in the so-called spiritual thing, who here has found that usually give it long enough and then you start to find out that they abused people and there were sexual deviants and all of that? Or let's pick on Catholicism, right? They're not to be married, right? But then what happens? They end up abusing children. Do you see, like, it doesn't matter, like, Paul's not pointing at denominations, he's pointing at the root cause. And so I'm not going to sit here going, well, this doctrine and that denomination, because all you're doing is playing spiritual whack-a-mole. You're focusing on the symptoms, not the root causes. It's focusing on the flesh and emotions. Just as Eve said, we're not to touch the fruit. We're not to touch it. Show me where it says that. Romans 16, I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles. Again, chapter 1, how are these divisions and obstacles created? Arguments over the scripture, but missing the weightier matters of the heart. Okay? I'm not going to re-go over this. These things are contrary to the doctrine or to the teaching that you have been taught. Avoid them. Because remember, when you focus on arguments, even about the Torah, what are you really focusing on? Knowledge. And focusing on knowledge alone is actually a fleshly thing. Like, because you can puff yourself up. Look, you have to have a certain amount of knowledge, but knowledge is not the pursuit. Right? Messiah is the pursuit. And in pursuing Messiah, you will gain knowledge. Yes. But do not make knowledge the idol. For such persons do not serve our Master Yeshua Messiah, but their own appetites. The Greek word there is actually stomach, i.e. they're driven by their flesh. They're driven by their desires, their fleshly things, whether it be lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life, whether it be accolades, power, megalomania, these types of things. And by smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the hearts of the naive, the innocent. So these people prey on the spiritually vulnerable. It's amazing. I witness this all the time. But people who want to draw disciples unto themselves, they never seem to knock on my door, ever. Whose doors do they knock on? They go on behind the scenes, and they're not doing this consciously. They're going to those that will validate their understanding. This is why they unknowingly prey on the naive and the spiritually vulnerable. It's not a conscious thing. If it is, man, this is true wickedness. Revelation 18. Then a mighty angel took up a stone, like a great millstone, and threw it into the sea, saying, so will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will be found no more. Now, look, Mystery Babylon is not America or the papacy. It's it's the harlot that's spoken of in Proverbs. This spiritual seductress. You see her at play in the garden, right? Spiritual adultery. Eve, don't go to your husband. Come to me. Come to me, and I'm going to use your fleshly additions to the command to deceive you. Now notice verse 21, there's actually an allusion to making the little ones stumble. What does Yeshua say? Whoever makes even one of these little children stumble, it is better that a millstone was tied around his neck and that he was thrown into the sea. And so here, this, by the way, further reinforces that Mystery Babylon, this harlot, is the art of spiritual seduction is on the children, the spiritually naive and vulnerable. And so this will be the state of things at the end. Look around. Wonder no more. This is happening right now. And the light of a lamp. Now, what is the lamp? Biblically speaking, the word, your word is a lamp unto my feet, right? So the light of the lamp. Now, when King David was saying your word is a lamp unto my feet, he was referring to the Torah. Again, what will the adversarial position seek to attack? The law in the appointed times. So the light of the word of the lamp will shine in you no more. So what will be instead of the word? What will be there instead? The voice of the bridegroom and the bride will be heard in you no more. There is so much spiritual harlotry going on that you're not hearing from the groom anymore. You're hearing what has the truth been replaced with? The doctrines and the precepts of men and the teachings of demons. And what are the teachings of demons? Things that will use the truth in a way, but you focus on the flesh and the outside of the cup at the expense of the heart. That is what will have been replaced. Look, this is why you get things, prosperity gospel. What does it focus on? The flesh. Judaica and Judaism, a lot of it focuses on asceticism and taking pride that you're physically different and look different. For your merchants were the great ones of the earth, and all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. Now, it's actually pharmakia in the Greek here, which implies that there's also an element of drug sorcery here. And so this takes us back to part 3, that we're to be sober-minded. The pharmakia, whether it be, again, think of being under the influence of a particular substance, whatever your preferred poison is, whatever your stumbling block is. So not only will the word, the truth of the word, be replaced with fleshly things, you're not hearing from the bridegroom, you're not hearing from the bride, i.e. those that the king has put in play. Look, yeah. And on top of that, people are not in their right mind. Why? because they've been led to a fleshly thing. They've got no good fruit, no overcoming, no heart circumcision. So who do they go to? They go to the secular world, and they go to, give me this, give me that, give me your psychology this, give me your drugs that. And what are they? And again, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. They're literally drinking water from the sewers. It's all filth. And here we are. And so, bringing it back round, in later times, some will depart from the faith, which is founded on the Torah, the appointed times, and on discipleship and accountability. They will devote themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons. What is it? Focus on the outside of the cup and at the expense of the heart. Which means you could literally be ticking the boxes of Torah, wearing your tzitzits, and yet your life is a mess. You're so focused on the outside of the cup. And as a result of that, your conscience becomes seared. You can no longer hear truth. You are no longer sober-minded. You can be drunk with emotion. You can be drunk. You can be under the influence of even trauma and abuse where, who here has dealt with, abuse and trauma victims, and when you speak to them, it's not them speaking, but it's the trauma and thing. Again, they're not thinking clearly. This is why we need to overcome, whether it be alcohol, drugs, pharmakia, whether it even be our past. Our distrust can be so blinding as well. And so I'm not going to sit here going, this doctrine, that doctrine. The scripture is giving you, this is what you look out for, and then watch how it plays out. For everything created by Elohim is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is set apart by the word of Elohim and by prayer. Now, I'm not going to get into a foods teaching here, because more on the Christian side, it's commonly taught, it's all good. Pray over the Easter ham. Pray over the Christmas turkey or, the Christmas bacon, whatever. What foods are set apart by the word of Elohim? And what was the word of Elohim in Paul's day? Like literally the verse itself, people will only focus on the prayer aspect. Oh, just pray over it. No. It's set apart by the word of Elohim. What food is set apart by the word of Elohim? Go read your Torah, okay? But if you've been listening to the doctrines of demons, which attack the Torah and the appointed times, want to know more, why you get the error that is taught now. Now, before I go there, let's remember, Paul is saying, the context of this is to not focus on the flesh. What Paul is addressing here, again, is this asceticism. Do not touch, do not taste, do not taste and eat certain things. So, again, look, I'm going to pick on the SDAs here. As a former SDA, that they pride themselves in being vegetarian. Okay. And a lot of them pride themselves in being vegan as well. Okay. My attack is not on vegetarianism or even veganism, but the problem is that they will have a holier than thou attitude because they do these things. Oh, you eat meat. You're not set apart. I'm better than you. And so Paul is not talking about eating the Easter ham here. Even in the first century, the Gnostics and even to some degree the Qumran community, people miss this, but the Qumran community, they preached asceticism. Like they all wore the same clothes and they were very plain clothes, and they weren't allowed to eat meat because it was too sensual. And relations between husband and wife were not to be enjoyed. They were purely there for the thing of procreation and bringing about children. Like, where does it say these things in the word? Now, is that behavior manifesting again in the modern day? You betcha. Don't do this, don't do that. And they will use that to have a holier than thou attitude. This is what Paul is addressing, not whether you should be eating pork or shrimp, okay? He's saying, don't hold yourself higher if you choose not to have lamb, for example. Like, remember that what Paul was saying, if your brother doesn't want to eat meat, fine. Just don't make him stumble. This is what Paul's addressing. If you put these things before the brothers, what things? Everything that we just covered, focus on the heart. The flesh will be cleaned up as a result. Clean the inside of the cup and the outside shall be clean too, right? This is what we're to be focusing on. Discipleship, the appointed times, Messiah. If we focus on these things, you will be a good servant of Messiah Yeshua, being trained in the words of the faith and of the good doctrine that you have followed. Here, the word servant is diakonos, a deacon. So, as I said in the intro, look, it's very clear that Timothy acted in an overseeing capacity to some of the assemblies of Asia Minor. Because this is why we even have the letters of 1st and 2nd Timothy, and even Titus. Titus did the same thing. So they were overseers. What Paul says to Timothy, go and appoint elders. You go and appoint them. So Timothy, within his sphere, was a episcope. But here we see Timothy being in the office of a deacon. Why? Because a deacon is one who executes the commands of another. In this case, the Apostle Paul. And so it's possible, actually, that you can be both an overseer and a deacon, if that makes sense. The problem is that we've, in the Western mindset, or even in the Christian mindset, we've made these particular offices. You're either a deacon or you're either an overseer, and you can't be both, right? We've made the deacon the guy that meets and greets you at the door and smiles and shakes your hand, right? But much like we've done it with the fivefold ministry, right? You're either an apostle or you're either a prophet, but you're not both. And actually, if you grow to the fullness of Messiah, you will work in all of the fivefold ministry. In the same way, deacon, overseer, right? Look, you'll see leaders of 10s, leaders of 50s, right? Let's use that as an example. You'll have a leader of 10, okay? He's the overseer, the episcope within his leader of 10. But the leader of 10 will be accountable to the leaders of 50s. And so in that instance, he acts as a deacon. And so forth as you go up the chain until you get to the overseer, which is Messiah. Okay? But let's look at Moshe. Moshe was the episcope, the leader of the house of Israel. But he was the deacon to Elohim because he enacted the commands of Elohim and then he passed them on, right? That's all it's saying. So don't get hung up on, am I a deacon? Am I no? You might be both. But the issue is authority, structure, and knowing what's around you. I'll use myself as an example. I am an episcope as it relates to River Branch, but I'll always see Curtis as the donkey that's gone before me. And so in respect to my brother Curtis, I will be a deacon. I have a discipleship group that I oversee. I am the episcope of my discipleship group, but I am accountable to the eldership of the community. And in that regards, I'm a deacon. I hope this makes sense. being trained in the words of faith. Trained? Oh, you mean I don't get to just waltz in, learn a few Torah portions, and now I'm the leader? No, being trained, discipleship. Train in the words of the faith, which is based on discipleship. Have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. Rather, train yourself for godliness. Again, what's the context here, these silly myths? The doctrines and teachings of demons, the traditions of men, that may even use scriptural truths, but they will bend it to bring about an untruth, and usually that untruth will focus on flesh and emotion. It focuses on the outside of the cup. Rather, train yourself for godliness, i.e. the inside of the cup, right? For while bodily training is of some value, look, there is some value to doing things in the flesh, because purely from the point that it's a shadow picture. Look, what do the food laws teach you? Right? Are the food laws really about don't eat pork and shrimp? Or is it teaching you a weightier matter? Be careful what you eat or what you drink, i.e. spiritually. The word, the bread of life, or the unadulterated waters of life. Don't be drinking from the sewer is essentially what the food laws are saying. So while there is a value to the shadow picture, let it not be at the expense of godliness is of value in every way, i.e. the inside of the cup, as it holds promise not only for the present life, but also for the life to come. And so what Paul is saying, Timothy, if we focus on the truth, on the heart, you will be well trained in the words of faith, i.e. well done, good and faithful servant. You have been trustworthy with the little, which is now. The word is trustworthy and deserving of full acceptance. Again, what is the word back in Paul's day? For to this end we toil and strive, because we have our hopes set on the living Elohim, not on the outside of the cup, or what I didn't eat or drink, or what I didn't wear, or whatever it is. We have our hopes set on Elohim, who is the Savior of all people, especially of those who believe. Okay? So what are we toiling and striving for? Towards godliness, not every wind of doctrine or the doctrines of men or the deceptions of demons that will attack the appointed times, the Torah, that will focus on the flesh, that will reject authority and discipleship, or even worse, they will give you a counterfeit. It's called life group. Anyway, who and what is the focus of our faith? What are we striving for? Command and teach these things. What are these things? Godliness, the inside of the cup. Like, I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but I'm really trying to drill this in, because this is not just about the good doctrine of Christ, as is commonly taught out there. This is discipleship, accountability, overcoming, toiling, striving, forgetting the lies of our fathers, and focusing on our hearts, on discipleship, on walking with each other. Command and teach these things. That is the true faith. Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity. Until I come, devote yourself to the reading of Scripture, to exhortation, to teaching. And so again, just a simple reminder here, Yah does not judge by outward appearances. Again, it's not the outside of the cup, it's the inside of the cup. Okay, let's get to something that, again, very mistaught. Do not neglect the gift you have, which was given to you by prophecy when the council of elders laid their hands on you. Practice these things, immerse yourself in them so that all may see your progress. Keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by so doing, you will save both yourself and your hearers. Oh, right. So, things first. Let's remember the faith is founded on discipleship, okay? He says, do not neglect the gift you have. Actually practice these things. So you mean to say that, because the way this is taught is that the elders all got around Timothy and they went, oh, and they magically imparted and imbued him with the gift of prophecy. And now Timothy's just all singing, all dancing and, slaying people in the spirit. Like, this is how it's taught. If that was the case, Timothy wouldn't need to practice these things or immerse himself in these things. He wouldn't have to keep a close watch on himself, right? Because the elders waved their big magic hands and Timothy's all fixed. He's beyond reproach now. He's powerless to sin. Why would you need to keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching? Notice Paul is saying, hold yourself accountable, Timothy. You are still prone to wandering off the path. You are still fallen. So again, the question I've put here is, do we have a hocus pocus faith? Do we? Let me phrase it this way. Is our faith based on witchcraft? Because at the root, this is what a lot of us have inherited unknowingly at that. So the point, look, do your utmost is what Paul is saying here. Practice these things, immerse yourself, watch yourself, persist. This is active engagement. At the end of Proverbs chapter 1, around verse 21, it says that the complacency of fools destroys them. And the fool in this context is someone that understands the faith, but is very lackadaisical and does not heed reproof or accountability. And so the faith is an active, participational faith. This is why I say you can show up all you want, but are you partaking? So let's get this. This is the context that prophecy and the laying on of hands occurs in, by the way. So we're going to deal with the laying on of hands first, so that then we can deal with prophecy, because the two are kind of intertwined. Firstly, the context of laying on of hands is that of practicing and doing. Notice this. Do not neglect the gift, which implies that Timothy had a gift, but he had to work on it. I will use a very easy example. People will say to me, oh, Michael, you're so good at the guitar. You play really, really well. Do you think I came out of the womb being able to play the way No, I had to not neglect the gift. I had to practice it. I had to immerse myself in it, and I had to persist in it. I had to nurture and develop this gift. Okay, so there's an active participation here. Let's remember, Yah does not reward laziness. On the contrary. Now, is there the ability for Yah to fast track your ability to grow in your gift? Absolutely. Absolutely. For example, my spiritual line of sight and discernment, I believe, was accelerated by Elohim. But I had to do my part, which was discipleship, accountability, and serving. But did he meet me? Yah met me more than halfway. Believe you me. So the context of laying on of hands is of practicing and doing. And Timothy was expected to nurture and grow in his giftings. He was expected to work on them, grow in it. Look, have you ever wondered why in the Tanakh we have a school of prophets? What do you think they were doing, right? Because the way it's taught is that the school of prophets was a group of people, and they all sat in a circle and had their, I don't know, drum music, and they got themselves emotionally unstable, and they're running around dancing. And that sounds awfully like what the pagans used to do. Why even have a school of prophets if you're not expected to learn, grow, immerse, practice, persist? Now ask yourself, what were the prophets being schooled in? On how to get all emotional? No, we shall see. But bear this in the back of your mind. 2 Timothy 1, verse 5. This is Paul speaking to Timothy. I am reminded of your sincere faith, i.e., without hypocrisy. A faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well. And so let me ask a really obvious question. How did the faith pass on from grandmother, mother, and ultimately to Timothy? How did it pass on? Maybe we had a grandmother and mother that understood the Shema, that you shall diligently teach these things to your children. When you walk by the way, when you lay down, something is being passed on, okay? Now, when as well did Timothy simply arrive to a mature and sincere faith? Like, why did Timothy even have to sit at the feet of Paul? Because look, not only do we see the faith going from Lois and ultimately to Timothy, but then Timothy has to sit at the feet of Paul. Why? Do you see that there's discipleship, learning, growing, immersing, practicing? It's passed on. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of Elohim, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. So again, if the laying on of hands is just this magical ceremony, hocus pocus, I give you the gift of faith and prophecy, why does Timothy need to fan it into flame? What does it even mean to fan into flame? You see, like, who's doing the fanning? Timothy. Growing it. How do you grow it? Practice, immerse, keep watch, stand. So we'll deal with the laying on of hands. But again, do you see that Timothy was expected to grow in the gifting he had? He was to work at it, grow it. Again, any of you that has a talent of singing, music, even constructing sculptures, did you just come out the womb able to do that? Or did you have to hone your craft? What do you think that that's a shadow picture of? 1 Timothy 5, verse 22. This is the following chapter. Paul says to Timothy, do not be hasty in the laying on of hands, nor take part in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. The sins of some people are conspicuous, i.e., they're obvious. You can see some stuff right away, going before them to judgment. However, the sins of others appear later. It takes time, right? It takes time. And so Paul is saying, don't do this laying on of hands because the sins of others appear later. Again, look, what did we cover in part 3? Playing the long game. Test people through time. The only way you're going to know someone's character is through time, crushing, fire, and how they react and operate during the fire and the crushing. Verse 24 only makes sense if the laying on of hands is speaking of a process over time. You mean that the laying on of hands is not just a transactional event, it's a process? Because if not, this statement makes no sense. Like, again, let's use the hocus pocus understanding. If you lay your hands on someone and somehow you magically imbue them with a new heart, that surely wouldn't appear later because they've been magically changed. Do you see where the logic starts to fall through and become illogical? If the laying on of hands is not a process, verse 24 doesn't even make sense. And so what is this laying on of hands? Look, Paul says he laid hands on Timothy. And we've seen that for Timothy to be an overseer and a deacon, the requirements of deacons and overseers is that they're tested over time. Think laying on of hands like a potter shapes the clay. Okay? Imitate me as I imitate Messiah. You know, no, let's keep going, but no, let's go there. Who here has found, those of you watching, that as I've grown, you've heard Curtis speaking through me, if that makes sense. You've heard me say something and go, I can hear Curtis in that. Why do you think that is? Is it because I'm suddenly Curtis is on the pedestal and I think the sun shines out of him? No. It's because imitate me as I imitate Messiah. You know, like you should sound like you should be starting to sound like the donkey that's gone in front of you. You know, it's funny because there are those that I have walked with and I hear them speaking. I'm like, I can hear something of me in them. And so why? Because of this shaping that occurs through discipleship as the potter molds the clay, as it were. Here, I believe what Paul is saying to Timothy is don't lay hands, don't begin a discipleship process with someone hastily. Why? Because you may do this and find out that the sins of others appear later. I.e., he's saying, Timothy, don't forego playing the long game. Don't forego testing them to make sure they're, the testing without reproach. See these things in him that we covered in part 3. Servant leaders who aren't ready to serve yet, they've been put into a position too soon. They've actually had hands laid on them too hastily. This is why in discipleship we vet people, because we're going to be giving our time. There's a vulnerability that comes with that. They've not had the time to forget what lays behind, right? The traditions of men and Mystery Babylon. And unfortunately, if you don't watch someone over time and you see that they're actually starting to get rid of the leaven, it means that if they've been put in a position too quickly, those they disciple will actually become twice the sons of Gehenna. Because the servant leader was put in a position too quickly. They've not gotten rid of the traditions of men, and then they end up teaching those. And again, what happens, you get this mixture of what is of Elohim and what is of the world. This is all Paul is saying. Don't lay hands on, don't start a discipleship with someone, a discipleship process too quickly, or else it's going to bite you in the behind at some point. Why? Because the sins of others appear later, which is why you need to play the long game. This is why chapter 3 says, do these things. It's to circumvent this little problem from occurring. And it's not a little problem, by the way. It's huge. This is why Paul says in chapter 3, a servant leader or a deacon is not to be someone who is newly planted, or else this can occur. You may say, but Michael, in the book of Acts, there's this and there's this, and it clearly shows the laying on of hands is some kind of supernatural. All right, let's go through it. It turns out that the laying on of hands does not appear many times in Scripture, believe it or not. So it's ironic that it's become such a major pillar of the Christian faith, ironically speaking. The laying on of hands appears. We're going to cover 4 verses or passages There's another passage that deals where Paul laid hands on someone and healed them. That's a standalone. Every other reference the laying on of hands can actually be a negative thing, as in you lay hands on someone to do them damage or to throw. Right, the Jews would seek to lay hands on Yeshua to throw him out or stone him, or they would seek to lay hands on Paul and beat him. Right, so it can be used in that context, but it can also be used in this context of laying on of hands. We're going to look at what Scripture actually says regarding this. Acts chapter 6. This is, the apostles. This whole thing is not good for us to be waiting tables. The 12 summoned the full number of the riffraff or the new believers, of the disciples, and said, it is not right that we should give up the preaching of the word of Elohim to serve tables. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty. Riddle me this. How did they know these things about these men that they would go and choose? Isn't this the same requirements that Paul covers in 1 Timothy chapter 3? How do you know someone's reputation unless you've walked with them? Notice who's been addressed. The disciples. They've undergone a process. And what they said pleased the whole gathering. The gathering of what? The disciples. And they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of the set-apart spirit, and Philip and Prochorus and Nicanor and Timon and Parmenas and Nicolaus, a proselyte of Antioch. Again, how did they know that Stephen was a man full of faith and set-apart spirit? Because he can shout hallelujah and give a charismatic and enthralling message? Or had they walked with him? These they set before the apostles, and they prayed and laid their hands on them. Look, I'm not going to deny that there was a physical ceremony of the laying on of the hands. But notice that this seems, in this context, it's a completion of something. It is just that, a ceremony. It's an outward expression of something that's already happened, okay? Remember what Paul said, don't lay hands on someone hastily. Why? Unless they've been tested. So why are the apostles willing to lay hands on these people? Because A, they're disciples, they have a good reputation, which takes time, and they're full of faith, and they know these men intimately well. They go, I can assure you that the choice of people here did not surprise the apostles. In fact, it would have probably confirmed what they thought. And so they were willing to even do a ceremony of the laying on of hands. I'm going to put something forward to you that this laying on of hands is very much like physical circumcision for men and baptism, immersion. It's an outward expression of something that has already occurred on the inside. Let's see if my statement holds water. Acts chapter 8. Now, when the apostles at Jerusalem heard that Samaria had received the word of Elohim, they sent to them Peter and John, who came down and prayed for them that they might receive the set-apart spirit. So again, Samaria, is it full of pagans? Samaria was primarily full of the northern tribes, of the northern kingdom. They actually had a faith. And people miss this. The majority of those in Samaria had. Who do you think Yeshua was preaching to in the northern territories? The lost, not the lost, but the scattered tribes. They came down and prayed for them that they might receive the set-apart spirit. It's worth knowing also at this time, Paul is persecuting the assembly. The Apostle Paul is not, for Messiah, so to speak. And so life and death is on the line. Now think about this. Someone is of the faith of Messiah under the threat of death. What does that say about them? It says a lot to their character, does it not? This is not just someone, oh, I believe. This is someone that's willing to die for their faith. Think about that. For he had not yet fallen on any of them, but they had only been baptized in the name of the Master Yeshua. Whose name have they been baptized into? Yeshua. That's who Paul's persecuting. And so these are not just attendees. These are people that are willing to put their life on the line. That says a lot about their character. That you would die. No man has greater love, right? That he should lay down his life for his brother and ultimately his king. Then they laid their hands on them and they received the set apart spirit. Now, let me ask you this. Through this ceremony, did they force the hand of Elohim and say, you need to give them the spirit? Who ultimately decides to give the Ruach to someone? Elohim. Which means that actually Elohim is approving of this. He's approving of their choice of laying on of hands, and he's blessing them. And so, do you see what's going on here? I'm going to say something. Could Peter and John discern that these were true believers? Again, do not lay hands on someone hastily. Otherwise, their sins may come out, i.e., you may find out they claim the faith, but they do not walk in it. Therefore, you need to watch out for them. Do you think that these people could discern they were of the true faith? I mean, look, they were holding the faith of Yeshua under pain of death. I think they could discern these were true believers. And Yah is simply going, I see it too. So the laying on of hands is actually a confirmation. And I've put here, what is the true faith? What was the faith of Yeshua back then? Because the way the book of Acts is taught is quick, get the bums on seats, get them baptized, bless them, slay them in the spirit. And then what? You leave them. It's always about getting the people coming in through the door, right? Generally. But once they're in through the door, on you go, do what the hell you want. Subject to your own emotions, make the faith up as you go along. There's no discipleship. So what was the true faith then? Do you think that now they had the set apart spirit? All right, off you go. Like these, again, in Samaria, they'd been hearing the teachings of Yeshua and of the apostles for 3 years. 3.5 years, you can argue. Because let's remember that Yeshua was preaching to the northern tribes before the disciples even came on the scene. They already had a faith. Yeshua gave them the deeper insights of the faith. And not only that, these people are clinging to the faith under threat of death. Yeah, let's lay hands on them. Do you see what's going on here? These were not people just quick get bums on seats. These were people in a faith founded upon the Torah, the appointed times, discipleship, and accountability, and that were willing to die for it. Literally. Yeah, let's lay hands on someone. Acts chapter 8, Simon the magician, right, or the sorcerer. When Simon saw that the Spirit was given through the laying on of the apostles' hands, he offered them money, saying, give me this power also, so that anyone on whom I lay my hands may receive the set-apart Spirit. Who thinks the laying on of hands is about hocus-pocus power? It's Simon the magician. Do you honestly think that the disciples had actual power? That they were the beholders of the power of Elohim? or were they simply a vessel through which it literally passed through them, for a lack of better words? Do you, not only that, I've put here, Simon wants the goodie bag, quote unquote, the power without the hard work required. Remember what I'm putting forward, that the laying on of hands is a process, which is why Paul would say to Timothy, practice these things, immerse these things. Do not neglect the gift in you. In fact, fan it into flames. Go, do your utmost. Work at it, toil at it. I've said in past teachings, this is the enemy. You want to spot the enemy? He will give you the quote unquote goodie bag without the hard work and the overcoming, only to find out that you didn't get the goodie bag. You got a counterfeit. This is what Hasatan tried to do to Yeshua and tempted him. Bow down before me and all this will be yours. All the kingdoms of the earth will be yours. Bow down. Have the kingdoms of the earth without going through the plan of redemption and you laying your life down. You can have this without the toil. What did Yeshua do? No. Not only will I toil, but I will be the King of Kings. But I know I have to toil to get there. Like, again, if you want to spot the enemy will give you the goodie bag without the hard work, only for you to find it wasn't the goodie bag, it was the counterfeit. And so again, like Acts chapter 8 is showing you that this is not a power that is just given. Give me this power also. Look, what's Simon trying to do? So that anyone on whom I lay my hands on may receive the set apart spirit. In this verse, Simon the magician is actually deluding himself. Do you actually think he cares about giving other people the set apart spirit? Do you actually think he cares about the people? Or is it that he wants, I gave them the power to do this? Do you see? This is what Simon is telling himself to delude himself. Again, what is the doctrines and teachings of demon? Focus on self, the flesh, the outside of the cup. So if you think that the laying on of hands is a magical power, you're in good company with Simon the magician. How's that? But Peter said to him, may your silver perish with you. Again, Peter doesn't have a love for that which is worldly. Because you thought you could obtain the gift of Elohim with money? How do you obtain the gift of Elohim? Faith, discipleship, a journey to he who overcomes by being tested so that something precious and worthy may come out. Simon the sorcerer is I'll pay for it. This beckons the question again, how do you obtain the gift of Elohim? You have neither part nor lot in this matter. Look at what Peter's exposing. Your heart is not right before Elohim. Repent, therefore, of this wickedness of yours and pray to the Master that, if possible, the intent of your heart may be forgiven you. Again, did Simon the magician really want to bestow the power upon other people, or did he want it to be about self? If you read the context, we see that Simon the magician had been getting a lot of adoration from the people because of miracles he was doing. And now the apostles come on and they've trumped him. He's no longer the man. What Simon the sorcerer is trying to do is remain top dog, and he's willing to deceive for it. Peter rightly discerned not to lay hands on Simon. How? Look, Peter's barely met Simon, arguably for the first time, and what does Peter say? It's not even about the money, it's your heart, the intent of your heart. Peter's gone right to the root. How was Peter able to see this? Hold that thought. For I see that you are in the gall of bitterness and in the bond of iniquity. You are a slave to sin. You are a slave to your desires. And Simon answered, pray for me to the master that nothing of what you have said may come upon me. Look at what Simon's doing. He's still displaying a hocus pocus understanding of the faith. You do the work for me mentality. You say the magic words so that bad stuff doesn't happen to me. Look, I'm going to say it. This is mentality is an alive and well in the charismatic side of Christianity. Simon is still displaying hocus pocus understanding of the faith. Not only has Peter said, I'm not going to lay hands on you, but Simon's saying, say the magic word so that this stuff doesn't come upon me. This really starts to get at the root of what is prayer and intercession really all about. And who should you even intercede for and how? Acts 13. Now there were in the assembly at Antioch prophets and teachers. Barnabas, Simeon, who was called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, a lifelong friend of Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. Notice here, these men were part of an already established authority structure. These were prophets and teachers. And we can easily assume they were true prophets and true teachers. Do you get there like that with some magical ceremony? Or as Paul says, test these people before you put them into positions. These were tested. It was well established. While they were worshipping the master and fasting, the set-apart Spirit said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them. Then after fasting and praying, they laid their hands on them and sent them off. Now, go read the preceding chapters of the book of Acts. Did Saul or Paul just get to waltz on into the body? No. The apostles were like, you do realize who this is, right? You do realize he was tested first. And notice the prophets. What did Paul say to Timothy? The gift that was given to you by prophecy through the laying on of the hands of the eldership. Right? So notice that you've got the same thing going on here, prophets and teachers, which means they have a solid understanding of the covenant and the appointed times, right? The things that the doctrines of demons will seek to attack. Acts 19, it happened that while Apollos was at Corinth, Paul passed through the inland country and came to Ephesus. Now we know there was an assembly at Ephesus. There he found some believers. No, he found some disciples. And he said to them, did you receive the set-apart Spirit when you believed? And they said, no, we have not even heard that there is a set-apart Spirit. And he said to them, into what then were you baptized? They said, into John's baptism, Yochanan the Immerser. So these are not just disciples of Pharisees. They just haven't gone further forward in the faith. I've put here a question. What is Paul trying to discern? And underscore the word discern. What is he trying to discern? I'm going to argue he's trying to discern, are they of the true faith? Because again, remember, Paul's letters over and over, there's true believers, there's going to be false believers, and they're going to sound real good. Oh, they're going to sound real good, but you need to watch out for them because they're going to hand you over in the name of Elohim, right? What is Paul trying to discern? Are you of the true faith? Because Paul's about to do something. Paul said John baptized with the baptism of repentance. And remember, who was John the Baptist pointing to? There is one greater than me who is coming, right? Telling the people to believe in the one who was to come after him, that is Yeshua. On hearing this, they were baptized in the name of the Master Yeshua. Again, remember, at this stage in the first century, your faith in Yeshua could have got you killed. Life and death. And when Paul had laid his hands on them, so there is this ceremonial aspect, the set-apart spirit came upon them and they began to speaking in tongues or languages and prophesying. So Paul has discerned, are these of the true faith before I do this? And Paul's choice of the laying on of hands is being confirmed by Elohim because the Spirit descended upon them. Do you see what's going on? So I've put here, the act of the laying on of hands is much like baptism and physical circumcision. It's an outward rite or demonstration of something that is truly going on the inside of the cup. And in every instance we've seen here on the laying on of hands, there's a process of discernment that has occurred before it. Has it not? The only other time you see the laying on of hands in Acts is when Paul laid his hands on someone and healed them. And then every other mention is in the negative sense of laying hands on them and throwing them in jail or beating them. These are all your examples of the laying on of hands. When you read it in context, it doesn't bode well for this hocus pocus idea. In all these instances, the people who had hands laid on them were firstly discerned and were part of a discipleship-based faith, i.e. the true faith, to the point that we're willing to lay their life down. So, going back to Timothy, don't neglect this gift of this gift you have, which was given to you by prophecy when the council of elders laid their hands on you. Question. Again, practice, immerse yourself in these things. The long game. Remember that Paul doesn't lay hands on anyone hastily, which means that neither do the council of elders. The council of elders could discern Timothy's faith. And the question is how? How could they discern it? Well, first of all, again, practice, immerse. Timothy was tested by discipleship and time, by the long game. Timothy was willing to lay down his life for his faith. He was willing to go through the crushings, the trials. This was evident. Timothy had been tested. So how could Paul and Timothy discern to lay hands on Timothy? Sorry, how could Paul and the council discern to even be able to lay hands on the council on Timothy? How? First is being tested. Why did Paul even lay hands on Timothy? Because remember, pardon the pun, but not all believers are created equal. And what I mean by that, there's different level. How can I put it? There's believers that just attend and there's believers that partake, right? I hope people can hear what I'm getting at here. I am reminded of your sincere faith. How did Paul know that Timothy's faith was sincere? Right. I remind you to fan into flame the gift of Elohim, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. So not only did the council lay hands on Timothy, so did Paul. And as we've seen, the physical act of the laying on of hands is simply an outward expression of a testing and process that has already occurred. They've been vetted, tested, discerned. Therefore, I'm willing to go through with this. This is why you don't lay hands on someone hastily, because before you do that, a process of discernment has to occur. Could this be entwined with the gift of prophecy? Let's look at the role of a prophet. Wow, I'm going long. Yah said to Moses, see, I have made you as Elohim to Pharaoh. It actually says that. Just get over it. And your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. So Aaron was a prophet to Moshe. You shall speak all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go out of his land. So essentially, Aaron is a mouthpiece of Moses, but Moses is learning from Elohim. So essentially, that when it says, I have made you as Elohim to Pharaoh, he says, you will be my representation. You will be my envoy, my ambassador, but Aaron is going to speak for you, right? Because remember, Moshe is like, oh, I can't speak well, blah, 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 whinge, right? But here we see a prophet is a mouthpiece. He has a message to give that's come from further above. Then the anger of Yah was kindled against Moses, and he said, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know he can speak well. So a prophet has to be able to speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be Elohim to him. So again, Yah is saying, you're going to be my ambassador, my representation to Aaron, and Aaron is going to be your mouthpiece. But we saw from the previous passage that that can also be deemed as he shall be your prophet. Being a mouthpiece for Elohim means one cannot add or take away to the word, right? We're back to this thing. Don't add or take away. A prophet is someone who can be trusted to give a message from on high, which is why the statement that Yeshua says of Nathanael, here is an Israelite in whose mouth is no guile. Can you speak the word without tainting it? Well, the prophet is hearing it word for word. Is that so? Is that so? Numbers 12. I love this passage because it gives us so much insight into the role of a prophet. This is Aaron and Miriam getting a spiritual spanking, as it were, from Yah for speaking against Moshe. Yah says, hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, Yah, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. And so we see with all the prophets, right? You know, Yah to Jeremiah, what do you see, Jeremiah? I see a budding almond branch. Well done, you have seen correctly. Right? Was it the fact that Jeremiah could see this and say what it was, or did he understand what the vision meant? Right? Or the other one, Jeremiah, what do you see? I see a boiling pot. Well done, Jeremiah. Is it the fact that Jeremiah saw a boiling pot, or could he understand what that meant? Why do I say this? Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, and not in riddles. And he beholds the form of Yah. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? See, this is how, like, when Moshe dies, it says that there was no other prophet like him whom Yah spoke with him face to face. And Yah's giving you a little extra clue here, not in riddles. This is one of the ways that there was no prophet likened unto Moshe, right? Because it would seem that with the other prophets, Yah spoke to them in riddles, in visions, in dreams. And so it is with all the prophets that you see. Jeremiah, what do you see? I see a budding almond branch. I see a boiling pot. Well done, Jeremiah. Look at the prophet Daniel. He saw these visions. Did he understand them? No. Yah had to say, Gabriel, give this man the understanding. Moses is different than all the prophets because he was spoken to clearly, i.e. not in riddles. By the way, this gives an insight into how Yah spoke, how Yeshua was spoken to, because he was a prophet likened unto Moshe. A whole other thing here. So let me ask you this question. What does one need to be able to understand dreams, visions, and riddles? Do you think you need an understanding of the word? Not only an understanding, but the ability to rightly divide it. Look, I've said in the past before that in the past, Yah has spoken dreams to me. They are riddles. The only way you can understand them is if you understand biblical typology. You understand scripture and the word pictures, if you want to call it that. And I'm not talking of the paleo here. I'm talking of, biblical representations and biblical themes. And even then, I go to my accountability and go, brother, I get most of it, but riddle me this. And so the point I'm trying to get is as I've grown and matured, dreams become easier to understand. So here's my question. What do you need, A, to be able to understand dreams, visions, and riddles? And second, how is it acquired? How do you acquire the ability to rightly divide a dream and a vision and a riddle? By the way, why were the Proverbs given? The Proverbs were given so that you could understand the riddles of the wise. And then we know Yeshua says that in the Proverbs, in the riddles, are hidden the secrets of the kingdom. How do you see these things? How do you acquire this ability? Oh, I pray for it and someone magically lays hands on me and I get all emotional. Because that's what Simon the magician thought. Or is there a process? Again, why was there even a school of prophets? Like, what were they actually learning? What were they learning? Hopefully by now you're starting to understand what they were learning. Discipleship, growing in the word, able to rightly divide it, able to discern it. 1 Corinthians 14, but if all prophesy and an unbeliever or outsider enters, he is convicted by all, he is called to account by all. The word they're called to account is the word anakrino. Anakrino is the process that precedes krino. So in plain English, krino is the final sentence and judgment that you give. You are guilty, or you are not guilty, or this is what we're going to do. But before you get to that sentence, there's a whole process of judgment that has occurred where you're weighing up everything, right? Like in the Torah, it says, you shall diligently search to see if the matter is so. You will hear both sides. You will discern. You will dissect. You will weigh things, right? Anakrino is the process that gets you to the final call. So in this sense, would you lay hands on someone physically? That's the krino part, right? So what do you do before that? Before you lay hands on them, you discern them, you weigh them, you test them, you do the anakrino. And so this is what this is saying. If an unbeliever comes in and everybody can prophesy, he has been weighed, discerned by all. The secrets of his heart are disclosed. And so falling on his face, he will worship Elohim and declare that Elohim is really among you. A group of people have weighed an outsider and said, these are the secrets of your heart. How does that even happen? For the word of Elohim is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword. Listen to this. Piercing to the division of soul and spirit, i.e. the secrets of the heart, of joints of marrow. And look at this, discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Do you see what's going on here? The word, a true understanding and ability to rightly divide the word of Elohim, can help you discern the thoughts and intentions of someone's heart. Oh, Paul says that is through prayer, and that this is linked to the process of anakrino, the weighing, the dissecting, the discerning, so that you can come to a judgment or a decision. This should sound very familiar. We just covered it. Peter discerning Simon the magician. Look, what did Peter say? Because you thought you could obtain the gift of Elohim with money. He says, you've neither part or lot in this matter. Why? Your heart is not right before Elohim. Repent. Pray to the master if possible. You pray to the master, not me. The intent of your heart may be forgiven you. Peter would not lay hands on Simon because he discerned Simon's heart. How did he do it? Through the gift of prophecy, which helped him to anakrino, to weigh up, to discern the thoughts and intentions of his heart. How did he do this? Peter had such an understanding. This is not understanding in knowledge. This is wisdom in application. Look, servant leaders, if you cannot discern, again, what is this true spiritual undercurrents of a situation, you might need to fan into flame the gift of prophecy. You may need to practice these things, immerse yourself in these things. Prophecy is not just something that is magically given to you. You grow in it. You grow in it. Look, when I first started serving, I was very green behind the ears, and I thought that the behaviors I was seeing were the problems. Little did I realize that the behaviors were a symptom of a deeper spiritual problem. As I've grown, I've been able to discern that the behavior is not the issue. The issues of the heart are the issue. That is, I'm going to say it's a prophetic ability that you grow in. Peter was acting as a prophet in this moment. Like it shouldn't, I'm going to say, why are we afraid of saying that the gift of prophecy is growing in someone? I'll tell you why, because we've been so burnt by Christianity. And it's a classic case of, it's like the Mazzaroth. Hasatan does all his weird stuff with astrology so that you're not willing to look at the astronomy, right? The signs of the heavens. It's the same kind of principle. A lot of us have been so burned by Christianity and seen these things so mishandled that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm going to make a bold statement here. I see the gift of prophecy growing in this community, but not the way you think. If it isn't, we're wasting our time and we're not of the faith. It's literally that simple. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak. Let the others weigh what is said. So you don't just get to, I'm a prophet, blah, 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 blah. If you have a prophet that's not willing to be weighed by everybody else, run. Run. Truth does not mind being put on the stand. It doesn't. Let he who claims to be in the light walk in the light and come to the light so that others can see that his works are wrought in Elohim. Listen to this. The spirit of the prophets are subject to prophets, accountability, discipleship. You claim to have a prophetic insight, brother. Let's weigh it up. Let's weigh it up. Let's anakrino the process. Let's divide, discern. Then maybe we can be ready to lay hands on you. So, in finishing, do you see what's going on? Do not neglect the gift you have, which was given to you by prophecy. When the council of elders laid their hands, again, and not only the council, but Paul laid hands on Timothy. Timothy was schooled in the faith. He grew. He didn't neglect the gift. He fanned it into flames. He practiced these things. He immersed himself in these things. He persisted in these things. And not only that, the whole time he watched himself at how he went about it, i.e., he held himself accountable. By prophecy, by discerning, by anakrino, by weighing. Timothy was weighed in the scales. He was weighed. He was scrutinized. He was tested. And when he was found to be of the true faith, then they laid hands on him. It was Timothy, we're willing to do this physical act like circumcision, like baptism, because we see something in you that we've tested, we've weighed it, and we found it to be noble, true, and of Elohim. And not only that, we've discipled you. So we know you intimately. Therefore, let us confirm this with this physical act of the laying on of hands. It's far deeper, and I would say far more beautiful than the knockoff teaching we're being given of hocus pocus. Let's stop here. Sorry, but not sorry that I went long. I got really passionate today, but it's critical that we understand these things because, again, we need to be of the true faith so that we can be, as chapter 3 said, a pillar and a buttress of the truth so that we can be a light, not only to the outsiders, but even to the rest of the body that's currently drinking from the sewers, and they've been given false teachings. And again, we're literally witnessing the light of the Lamb being extinguished. We're witnessing the voice of the bride and the bridegroom being shushed. And it's like, we're not called to right their wrongs and fix them. Let's work on ourselves first, so that we can then be of good use. Let us be found to be trustworthy with the little and the little is huge in this time domain. It's our families, it's our households, it's our assemblies, it's our communities. But let's look in the mirror first, clean ourselves up so that we can be that light. Amen.